Good. So, Shalom Uvracha. Um, I hope this finds everybody well. And I thought to give just a short share this evening as an introduction to Chanukah, and the title is, the Chanukah Wars. And I think that there's a lot to say about relating the festival of Chanukah to the time that we're going through now, the time of war. So I'd like to speak a little bit about this evening. Mir Hashem will have other opportunities to speak about the halachos of Hanukkah, the different halachic questions, especially ones that come up this year, and other aspects of Hanukkah. But I'd like to begin with this today. I just want to say, before we begin, that today is the yahrzeit of the daughter of our very dear friend or dear friends, the Pades family. I see that David is here, so hello, David. So this should be Le'ila Nishmas, Daniela Chaya, Bas David. David, any other names?
David.
David Halevi.
Thank you. So it should be Le'ila Nishmasa. And it should also be for the schus of all of our soldiers and, of course, the hostages who need all of the schuyot that we can give them. We're not zeichet to be fighting on the front lines as they are, like the Rambam says, they're fighting al Yichud Hashem Hem Oisim, they're fighting for Yichud Hashem, fighting for the Jewish people, fighting for the revelation of Hashem in the world. And we need to do everything we can to support. So, of course, the Divrei Torah should be in support and in the schus of our soldiers. In the Al Hanisim davening that we say on Hanukkah, we say Al Hanisim on the miracles, for the miracles, Ala Purkon, Ala Gvuros, Ala Chuos. The Purkon is the redemption, Ala Chuos, the salvations, Ala Hanisim, Ala Purkon, Ala Gvuros, Ala Chuos, Ala Milchamos, She'asisa Lavasenu Payamim Ahem Basman Hazeh, that Hashem did for our forefathers in those days, at this time, at this period. And the question is, why do we say V'al HaMilchamot? We thank Hashem for the wars. And surely we should be thanking Hashem for the redemption. We should be thanking Hashem for the victory in the war, which is the salvation. We should be thanking Hashem for the gvuros, the tremendous might that HaKadosh Baruch Hu showed us and allowed us to achieve. But why do we say V'al HaMilchamot? Why do we thank Hashem for the milchama itself? So maybe you can say, well, it means for the victory. But the victory, you would think, is the purkon, or the chuos, right? The redemption or the salvation. Why do we mention in Al Hanisim for the milchamot themselves? It seems to be superfluous at best. Why are we adding milchamot? And even somehow, counterintuitive. We would prefer to achieve the victory without needing to fight a war. Of course, it's very rare to be able to vanquish your enemies without fighting a war. But here and there in the history of the Jewish people, we've had such victories. In Yetzias Mitzrayim, when we came out from Mitzrayim, we didn't have to fight a war against the Egyptians. We came out of Mitzrayim, biyad chazaka uvizroya netuya. HaKadosh Baruch Hu showed us tremendous miracles, and we were able to leave Mitzrayim without needing to fight any wars. And the war against Sancheriv. So Sancheriv, we were not able to fight the war, but Hashem made a miracle, and we were able to defeat, or we were, able to win a war without firing one bullet or shooting one arrow. There are such miracles. Why do we thank Hashem for the milchamot? Is there something to be thankful for? Right now we are in a milchama, and even though Baruch Hashem, the milchama is going well, and of course we are extremely determined to win the war, and we are we are confident in the justice of the cause. There's never been a more just war than the war we are fighting now. Perhaps there have been, I don't want to say never, but it's clearly a very just war, a war of good against evil, a war on behalf of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and his people. But nevertheless, are we grateful to fight a war? It's very painful to fight a war. I make frequent trips to Har Herzl. We should know no more tragedy, but every trip to Har Herzl is painful, is heartbreaking, is terrible, and we should know no more pain and anguish. So why do we thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the wars? This is the question that I'd like to speak about, at least a way of introduction. Why is it that we thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the wars? And I think that the secret to this lies in the very special and very unusual commemoration of Chanukah. The way in which we celebrate Chanukah is by kindling lights. We light the Chanukah lights. And of course, the sugya in Masechah Shabbos tells us that there's a machloket. There are two ways that we might be able to light them. We can use, there's Mahadrin and Mahadrin Mina Mahadrin, and we can be Moisef Hailech like Beis Hillel, or to go down like Beis Shammai. There's the comparison to Sukkot, which I mentioned before. But one way or the other, the very way in which we mark the festival of Chanukah seems very strange. It's true that in the Bavli, the Gemara brings the brisa of the special nace of the Pach HaShemen, meaning the oil that was only supposed to burn for a short time, for a day, and it ended up lasting for 8 nights. But in the other sources of Chanukah, I'm speaking about Maccabim Aleph, Maccabim Beis, the Maccabees in Megillas Tainis, in the Mishnah, we don't find any mention of the Nes Pach HaShemen. And it seems that the principal celebration of Chanukah is not about the Nes Pach HaShemen, but rather about the victory in the war. We were victorious over the Greeks, the Seleucid Greeks, and we were able to bring about the consecration or the reconsecration of the Mizbeach, Chanukas HaMizbeach. And in the davening, in Ala Nisim that we say in the Shemona Esrei, we make no mention of the Nes Pach HaShemen. We say Ala Nisim, Vala Gvuros, Vala Tzuros, Vala Milchamos, and then we say Bimei Matisyahu, Ben Yochanan, and so on. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the Rabbim Biad Ma'atim and Rishayim Biad Tzadikim and so on. Bezeidim Biad Oiskei Terasecho, Lochasis Hashem Gadol V'Kadosh Be'olamecha. And therefore, Kavu Shmona Semei Chanukah Elu Lehodos Olehala L'Shimcha Gadol, meaning the Shmona Semei Chanukah, the 8 days of Chanukah, were established because of the victory in the war. If the days of Chanukah are enacted, are established because of the victory in the war, then why do we have this very unusual way of celebrating, of lighting candles? We don't have this in any other festival during the year, that we commemorate, we mark the festivals by lighting candles. Why do we do it here? Excuse me one second. So I think that, excuse me, I think that the understanding of what is Chanukah all about, what exactly are we celebrating? What is Chanukah all about? So the Rambam writes in Hilchas Chanukah, towards the beginning, the Rambam writes that in Bai Sheni, Malchu Yavan, Gazu Gzeros al Yisrael, there were harsh decrees against the Jewish people. And the Rambam says that Shurichem Aleim, Elokia V'Seinu V'Ushiyim, Kadosh Baruch Hu had Rachamim, compassion, and he gave us salvation. V'gavru b'nei Chashmonai, and the b'nei Chashmonai, they overpowered the enemy, the adversary of the Greeks, the Haragum. And then the Rambam says, and these are the words that I want to focus on. The Rambam says, "V'heimidu." Don't remember the exact wording, but the Rambam says, "V'chazra malchus liYisrael yeser al masayim shana." Says the Rambam, Malchus returned, the kingship, the sovereignty, returned to the Jewish people more than 200 years. Ad Churban Hasheni, right? The Rambam writes, "V'hemidu melech mina kohanim." That's one of the questions. Because melech mina kohanim is a problem. The Rambam writes elsewhere in Hilchas Melachim that it's forbidden to have a king from the kohanim. It's forbidden to have a king who is not from Malchus Beis David. According to the Rambam, it might even be a transgression of a lotase. That's how the Rambam writes in Sefer HaMitzvahs. In Hilchas Melachim, he doesn't Mention this. In Sefer HaMitzvahs, he writes it might even be a transgression of a lotase, of sim tasei malecha, or an asay at least. I think it's a lotase mentioned in Sefer HaMitzvahs. The Ramban writes that it's a transgression of what Yaakov Avinu says. Because Yaakov Avinu says, "Look, shevet mi Yehuda mechokik mi bein raglov," that it has to be from Yehuda, from Malchus Beis David, and not from anybody else. But the Rambam writes that the Malchus returned to the Jewish people for more than 200 years. What kind of Malchus returned to the Jewish people? The Malchus that returned to the Jewish people was not a very impressive Malchus, right? The Rambam says all the way until Churban Sheni, till the destruction of the temple. Well, by the time the second temple was destroyed, the kings were Greek kings, Aristobulus and so on, and Hyrdos. They were kings that were anything but righteous kings. They were kings that brought the Jewish people back to a Hellenistic culture. The Kahuna became corrupt, and whoever paid the most money became the Kohen Gadol, meaning this was not a good time for the Jewish people. And nevertheless, says the Rambam, this is a cause for celebration. It's a reason to celebrate the festival of Chanukah because the Malchus returned to the Jewish people for 200 years. That itself is a reason to celebrate. That itself is a reason to have a festival of Chanukah. By the way, the Ramban writes very strongly against Matisyahu Kohen Gadol, against his children, and this Malchus. It's worth mentioning if you read in the Sefer Maccabees 1. So there, it's very clear that they didn't call any of the leaders a king. They called them by other names: Shofet, Manhig, other names: Shalit, Usar, an officer, a Rosh, a head. So even then, it was clear that this wasn't a full Malchut. It wasn't a full Malchus. It was not ideal. The situation was not ideal. It says over there, it was a temporary situation until we have the Malchus Beis David. It was a temporary situation. And nevertheless, this non-ideal, this problematic Malchus, according to the Ramban, it was very problematic. And he's very critical of Beis Chashmonai, and nevertheless, we celebrate. What's the celebration all about? Celebration is specifically about an achievement that was imperfect, an achievement that was far from the final destiny. It was far from the climax that we are aspiring to. But nevertheless, we celebrate. Because what do we celebrate on Chanukah? On Chanukah, we do not celebrate open miracles. We do not celebrate the revelation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu like on Pesach. or we do not celebrate and the sudden death of thousands or tens of thousands of the enemy without firing a bullet. This is not what we celebrate. On Chanukah, we celebrate human achievements. The war that we fought against the Yevonim, against the Greeks, was a long and bitter campaign. It lasted several years. It was at least 3 years before the Jews were able, the Hashmonaim were able to conquer or to retake Yerushalayim. And after they retook Yerushalayim, went on for another, I don't remember, 3 or 4 years, until the Greeks decided to retreat and to go back. And during those years, there were tragic losses. Some battles were won and some battles were lost. Everybody knows the story of Elazar a Kohen, that was killed. He was crushed under an elephant. It's a famous story. And it wasn't just him. Elazar was killed in war, and the Hashmonaim lost the battle. It was a great setback for the Hashmonaim. They lost the battle, but ultimately they were able to defeat the Greeks after a long and protracted war. In the beginning, it was a guerrilla war, and later on they had to face the Greeks in the open, and it was very difficult. And in the end, they managed to win this war. But there was no open miracle. There was no sudden, incredible victory that came out of nowhere. This was not Yetzias Mitzrayim. And that's the essence of Chanukah. The essence of Chanukah is a victory which is hard fought. It's a victory that includes tragic losses. Like every war, David HaMelech says, Kazoi v'kazeh toichal hacharev. That's true of every war, and it was certainly true of the war of the Hashmonaim, of the war against the Greeks. That's why this is a very unique festival. It's a festival in the middle of the winter. In fact, the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, in Daf Ches, the Gemara writes about the festival. I think it's called Calendaria there. Festival, a Goyish festival. It's a winter festival. What's this festival? Because Adam HaRishon, he saw that the light was declining because the days were becoming shorter and shorter, and the nights were becoming longer and longer. And then Adam HaRishon, he started to fast. He was Yoshe B'tainis because he thought the world was coming to an end. And then the winter solstice, meaning the days started to become longer and the nights started to become shorter. And then Adam HaRishon understood it's minhagoi shel olam. And based on this, there was a festival, the Gemara mentions a Goyish festival called Calendaria, the festival of the calendar. And it was an 8-day festival. Like Adam HaRishon, he himself celebrated for 8 days, and there was this 8-day festival of the Goyim. And it's very clear that Chanukah, as an 8-day festival, follows on from this. That the festival of Chanukah, also for 8 days, follows on from this, meaning it's a winter festival. All of the other Yomim Tovim, the Torah Yomim Tovim, are festivals of the summer. The summer is the time of goodness, the time when the sun shines upon us, the time when we feel the teeming of life in the summer, when we enjoy all of the produce of the fields, the months of the summer, the months of goodness. That's when we have Torah festivals, when we feel the light of a Kadosh Baruch Hu upon us. Even Purim, which is a D'Rabbanan festival, it's not in the summer, but it's close. It's at the end of the winter. But there's one festival which is in the middle of the winter, right? Leilei Teves Ha'arukim, in the long nights of Chodesh Tevet, and that's festival of Chanukah in Sefer in Josephus. The festival of Chanukah is called Chag HaUrim. We call it like that also sometimes in Hebrew. Chag HaUrim, festival of light. But it's amazing. It's a festival of light. Whose light? You know whose light? Our light. The festival of Chanukah is the festival of our lights. We kindle lights. We light our own candles. We don't have light from above. In the year, it's a time of darkness. It's a time in which we don't sense the warmth of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a time when we sense a distance. Everything is dark. Things are tough. We know in the night, the night is a tough time. It's a time when we sense discomfort. It's a time when we feel a certain lack of, we don't feel at ease in the night. We sense danger. And yet we celebrate Chag HaUrim. Which light? It's our light. Meaning Chanukah is a festival of human light. It's the festival of when we feel that we don't have a Kadosh Baruch Hu with us, right? We feel a distance, like in the time of Bais Sheni, we don't have the Shechina in an open way. It's not like Bais Rishon. We don't have open miracles. We don't have prophecy. The time of Nevuah is over. The Ran writes in the time of Alexander Mokta and in the time of the Greeks. This is when Nevuah departed from the world, meaning the world is plunged into darkness. That's the night. That's the night of Chanukah. That's the long nights of the winter. And into this long night comes the light of Chanukah, comes the light that we ourselves kindle, we ourselves light up. That's why we have this special form of commemoration, this special way of celebration, lighting candles to demonstrate that there's a time, there's a period where the light depends on us. When we bring the light into the world from our homes, from the Jewish homes, we light up the public domain, we light up the public street, which is darkened in the night, but we are able to bring the light to that. It's also related to the idea of Torah Sheba'al Peh, which begins to develop in this time, the wisdom of the sages, the wisdom of the Chachamim, the idea that Chacham Adif Minavi, we don't have the light from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We don't have that direct connection. We are missing the speech of Hashem, the instruction, this direct relationship. It's missing. We don't have the Gilui Shechina, but we are able to light our own candles, and we say, Haneros Halalu Kodeshem, that these lights are Kodesh. They have holiness. Hashem is within those lights. Hashem is within those candles that we light. This is the special nature of the festival of Chanukah. I understand that this is why the Rambam says that mitzvat ner Chanukah chaviva hi ad ma'od, very unique words. The Rambam writes that the mitzvah of the Chanukah lights has a special favor. Chaviv ad ma'od has a special wonder to it. Why is it so chaviv? You know, we have Pesach, we have Sukkot, we have beautiful mitzvahs around the year. Ner Chanukah chaviv ad ma'od. Why is Ner Chanukah so chaviv? I'll tell you why it's so chaviv. It's chaviv because it's ours. And we know from the Gemara that Rotze Adam bekav shelo mitisha kabin shel chaveroi. Gemara in Bava Metzia tells us that a person wants his own more than 9 of somebody else. The mitzvah of Ner Chanukah is our own mitzvah. Chachamim invented it. It's a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. And the light of the Ner Chanukah is our own light. Doesn't come from anywhere else. It's ours. And therefore it has a special favor, a special chavivut, special love, a special closeness. It has something which other mitzvot do not have. And I'd like to explain that this is why we thank Hashem for the wars. I opened with a question. In Al HaNisim, we say, Al HaNisim, the miracles, the Purkan, the redemption, the Gvuras, the Might, the Tshuos, the salvation. and the milchamot. Why are we thanking Hashem for milchamot? Isn't this bizarre? Milchamot are harsh. Milchamot come with losses. The milchamot of the Yevanim, of the milchamot of the Chashmonaim against the Yevanim, they had losses, and the milchamah that we are fighting now has losses, and we cry over them, and they are terrible losses. Why are we thanking Hashem for milchamot? The answer is because we thank Hashem that we are able to bring the achievements of the Jewish people with our own hands, with our own fighting, that we are able to fight. It's a privilege to be able to fight. There were many generations in which the Jewish people were unable to fight. There were many years, many centuries, even millennia, that we didn't have the ability to take arms and to fight against the enemy. Like Adam HaRishon, when he saw that the days were becoming shorter and the nights were becoming longer, there was nothing he could do. He could only accept it, an acceptance. Kedavan, he sat in kindness, the Gemara said, but there was nothing he could do about it. And for many, many generations, when we were faced by an enemy that wished to persecute us, that wished to exile us, that wished to hold inquisitions, that wished to kill us and to murder us and to hold pogroms against us, there was very little that we could do. We were unable to fight for ourselves. We didn't have the capacity, we didn't have the ability. But here, in the miracle of Chanukah, we thank Hashem for the milchamot, that we were able to fight. Chanukah is a time when we celebrate human achievement. We celebrate the candles that we light, the light that we bring into the world, the light we kindle with our own hands. But light that we kindle looks very different from the light that comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that comes from above. The light that we kindle is never going to be perfect because it's ours, and we are human, and we are imperfect. The light that we create will be flawed. It won't be whole. And indeed, the Malchus that we celebrate for 200 years, the Rambam says, that was not a perfect Malchus. It was, in fact, very imperfect. Towards the end, we could say it was corrupt, and it was very far from the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, very far from the Ritzoin Hashem. And even at the beginning, as the Ramban says, it was problematic because it was not Malchus Beis David. It was certainly non-ideal from the beginning. And nevertheless, we celebrate it. Nevertheless, we appreciate the goodness. We appreciate the tremendous merit, the tremendous chus of being able to achieve the human achievements that are good, even if they are not perfect. The fact that we are able to cleanse the Mikdash of the defilement of Yavan, cleanse the Mikdash of the defilement of Greece, the fact that we are able to remove the Hellenistic influences from within us, even if not completely. Indeed, the names of the future kings would be Greek names. It was clear that the influence was not cleansed completely from the Jewish people. But nevertheless, we celebrate those achievements because they are so meaningful. We begin a process, and we know that it's not perfect, but we know that it's meaningful. And that meaning is latent. That meaning is expressed in the strongest way in the war, in the fact that we have the schus of fighting a war. And fighting a war is no perfect condition. It's deeply imperfect because it means that we're going to suffer losses, like the Chashmonaim did. In fact, almost the entire family of Matisyahu was killed in battle or killed in revenge strikes within the family. Meaning the entire family was almost the entire family was killed. They didn't die peaceful deaths on their deathbeds. And nevertheless, this is what we celebrate. We celebrate the achievement which is human and therefore imperfect. We kindle the Chanukah candles, and we say Haneres Halalu Kodesh Heim, because there's kedusha in our achievements, even though they are far from being perfect. And I'd like to mention, this is not the kind of thing I mention in every share, but I'd like to mention a short work that was written by Herzl, Benjamin Zev, or Theodor Herzl. He wrote a short work, a short story, I would say, called The Menorah. I don't know if you are familiar with it, but if not, then I think it's important to be familiar with it. It's available online. It was written originally in 1897, just a few months after the first Zionist Congress in Basel. The Zionist Congress in Basel was, I don't remember if it was July or August in 1897, and the Menorah was published for the first time on the 31st of December, the end of December, 1897. It was then published in English around 1915 or so, and it was even published in the New York Times once, reprinted in the New York Times, and it's available online in the English translation. It's always also been rendered into Hebrew. What does Herzl write about? The work is very clearly autobiographic. He's writing about himself. And I'm reading from translation, which was retranslated by the Herzl Institute. And there he writes, it begins, once there was a man who deep in his soul felt the need to be a Jew. A man who felt the need to be a Jew. He writes about this person who was deeply assimilated. And he was so assimilated that he had long ceased to trouble himself about his Jewish origin or the faith of his fathers. Until what happened? Until he was struck by the ancient evil of anti-Semitism. All of a sudden, he saw that notwithstanding, despite his best efforts, he and his friends to assimilate, to become like the Goyim, it didn't help. Goyim continued to hate him. And he says that this effect of this torment of the Goyim hating him, it had the effect of bringing him back, of steering him, he writes, back to his source, back to his Jewishness. And he experienced the change. He began to love his own religion, his own people, with great passion. And it took him time to understand what was going on inside of him. And finally, he was able to realize that he was returning to his own roots. He was returning to the source from which he had come. And the entire story speaks about Chanukah, speaks about the menorah. That's why it's called the menorah. He says in previous years, he had never lit the menorah. We know that Herzl himself used to have a Christmas tree. I'm assuming he also didn't have a Chanukah menorah. And that's what he writes about. This person never had a menorah. But now he got himself a menorah. And he started to light it. And he didn't know much, but he did some research. And he told the children about the miracle of the return from Bavel, the return from exile, the wars of the Maccabees, the victory against the Greeks, the miracle of the lamp that burned so much longer. And then the second night, and then the third night, and candle after candle. And then finally, I'm skipping, the eighth day came. And he says, finally, when the eighth day, there was a great radiance that shone forth from the menorah. The eyes of the children sparkled, for our friend, which is Herzl himself, of course. He says the occasion became a parable for the awakening of a whole nation. First one candle, still dark, and the solitary light looks gloomy. Then it finds a companion, then another, and yet another. The darkness must retreat. The young and the poor are the first to see the light, then the others join in, all who love justice and truth, and so on. When all the candles are ablaze, everyone must stop in amazement and rejoice at what has been wrought, and no office is more blessed than that of a servant of this light. Ad Khan, quoting from the end of the short story by Herzl, I find it amazing that Herzl, when he's awakened to write about his own awakening to Judaism, he finds the inspiration in Chanukah. He finds the inspiration in the menorah, because this is what Chanukah is all about. Of course, what Herzl did was imperfect, and the state of Israel is established in a way which is not perfect. But that is what Chanukah is all about. Chanukah is about the human action which never reaches the peak of perfection, which always has another step to go. The idea of Chanukah is to begin a process. The Chanukah HaMizbeach is expounded on at great length by Rav Hutner in his Pachad Yitzchok on Chanukah, that this is the beginning towards not just the second Beis HaMikdash, but towards the third Beis HaMikdash also. Begins with a victory, begins with a human achievement of Chanukah. It begins a process. And that process, like all human processes, is filled with ups and downs. It's like a war. It's filled with victories and also with losses. And Herzl finds the inspiration for what he's doing, for his awakening of the Jewish people in the light of the Chanukah candles. And I feel that the time we are going through today is a time of the menorah. It's a second the menorah. We had Herzl's the menorah in 1897, and now it's another time of the menorah. Again, we have the anti-Semitism that's reawakening in places where the Jews felt that that's it. We've reached the menucha and the nachala. We've had decades of being able to live in peace without the evil of anti-Semitism raising its head. And now all of a sudden, like Herzl in end of the 19th century, all of a sudden it comes back. All of a sudden you realize that the condition of the Jews is such that we need to fight. We need to fight for ourselves. And in the same sense, all of a sudden we realize that we need to fight a war. And together with that fighting of a war, we are awakened, all of us, to return to the Judaism of our forefathers. I'm seeing around me this amazing awakening, not just of soldiers in the IDF, not just people who are on the battlefront, of course it's there also, but also among many others. Just yesterday, I heard an interview on the radio, one of the young women who survived the massacre of the Simchas Torah, October 7th, and she was asked by the interviewer, she was literally in the hands of the Hamas terrorists. A woman called I don't remember her family name now. I don't remember her family name. But she was in the hands of the terrorists themselves. And they were leading her away. And the interviewer asked her, what did you think at the time? And she said, you know what I thought? I thought about a Kodesh Baruch Hu. I thought that, that I have a munah and I thought that a Kodesh Baruch Hu is going to help me. It's just an anecdote, but it's a time of awakening in so many ways. And it's a time of awakening for us too, an awakening of belonging, an awakening of being a part of the Jewish people. For us, for those on this Zoom meeting, maybe we were there already. Many of us made Aliyah because of this feeling, because we're a part of the Jewish people, because we feel that we're ready to take action on this belief that we're a part of the Jewish people and we need to be a part of the trend that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is leading the world of returning to Eretz Yisrael, returning to the promised land and to the sovereignty that we have. But that sovereignty that we have is a sovereignty that speaks to the miracle of Chanukah. It's not a perfect sovereignty, but neither was that of the Chashmonaim. And nevertheless, we have a festival, like the Rambam says, Chazar Malchus L'Yisrael, Yeser HaMatayim Shana, more than 200 years, even though it was deeply imperfect, but it was a sovereignty of Jews who could fight wars. And today, Baruch Hashem, we're able to fight wars and we're able to return to the Chanukah festival, to light, to kindle the lights, and to appreciate that in our own actions, there's Kedusha, and that we have the privilege once again to fight wars, to be able to bring our achievements of fighting for the Jewish people, of fighting for the settlement, for the sovereignty of Jews on this land, and for trying to spread the light as much as possible, to spread the light of Kedusha, the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which depends on us, depends on our actions, as Chanukah teaches us. Purim is the festival of Jewish survival. Purim teaches us that we will always survive, even when things look bleak, even when things look impossible. Purim, if you want, maybe the words are harsh, but Purim is the festival of the Shoah, of the Holocaust. We survived. We were almost destroyed, but we survived. And that's the promise of Purim, that we would always survive. But Chanukah is not about survival. Chanukah is about the achievement. Chanukah is about the light that we bring. Chanukah is about the establishment of Jewish sovereignty here in the promised land in Israel. And it's about what we're doing now, continuing to fight the wars, like Bayamim Ahem, Bazman Hazeh. And halavai that we should be zoicha, like in the parable of the short story, the menorah, that one candle leads to another, and another companion, and more light, and to augment the light until you have the final 8 lights of Chanukah, which is reaching the peak, reaching the zenith, reaching the full expression of the light, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself will shine his light upon us. Halavai that the Chanukah festival, this great redemption of Chanukah that comes through our deeds, that comes through our maisim, will bring us b'mheira, speedily, to the final redemption, to the final salvation that we so await. Thank you so much for joining me here tonight. I much appreciate it. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to take. And otherwise, I'll be very happy to carry on the conversation. Amir Hashem, we start Chanukah tomorrow. We'll have many nights to be able to meet and to discuss and to speak about the wonderful festival of Chanukah. Good. Thank you very much. We'll leave it for there.
Thank you very much, Dave.
All the best. A great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.